the Age of Uncertainty podcast by Nigel Baker. Agile and Leadership with Chris Atkinson.
Hello, welcome to the Age of Uncertainty podcast. This episode is going to be a little bit different today because we're filming in an alternate location. Are you ready? Strapped in? Let's go. Oh, and there we go. As if by magic,
Brilliant.
Nigel appears.
There we are.
So welcome to Leadership and Agile, which is our latest episode of the podcast. I've got with me here Christopher Atkinson. I'd just like you to give a few words about yourself, Christopher.
Yes, I've become Christopher all of a sudden. I can be Chris for this. I'm Chris Atkinson. I'm a consultant and coach, and run a company in the UK called Strategic Leadership. And the aim for, I suppose, is to try and blend together two topics. The first topic being strategic acumen, which is how effective our leaders are executing strategy. And then the second one, which is conscious leadership, which is how self-aware are leaders about the impact that they are having on others. And the dream scenario is when people are strong in both of those things, they are generally seen to be pretty good leaders. So that's our focus.
Yeah. So taking that and building on it, what does leadership actually mean to you?
So I think we've got to a point where there's a general consensus now that we can separate out the leadership and management topics by power versus influence. So management is something I'm granted in virtue of a position, status from the organisation. I have some sort of authority. I'm allowed to do certain things. Leadership is the voluntary part of that. So it's, do people choose to listen to me? Do people want to follow me, do what I'm asking them to do? Not because I'm their boss or because I can punish them or reward them, but because they generally agree with what I'm doing. So I feel like the more you read, the more that's the consensus. Wasn't the case about 10 years ago, but I think more and more people now are understanding it in that way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so how have you been approaching that in your current work?
So we're sort of having to dismantle a lot of what people will have grown up with. Might not be quite the right word, but if you think about people who are middle and senior managers, they might have had a bit of a rough ride getting to the top. They might have been treated pretty badly by previous bosses. And to some degree, when I find myself getting up in an organisation to the more senior levels, I might want to now enjoy some of the privileges that come with that status. And I suppose for us, one of the challenges is when we get to sit and work with senior teams now, we're almost dismantling some of that infrastructure that they've kind of built around themselves by saying, actually, it's not really about you being an important person anymore. In fact, anything, you kind of need to be a whole lot more humble about it. And yeah, sure, your boss in the past probably made you do all of this stuff, menial stuff, or might have shouted or did whatever, but that isn't where we are now. So I think some people probably feel they got a bit of a raw deal. Their executive car parking spaces are getting taken away. The private bathrooms and the executive
corner
kitchens.
offices.
Exactly. Yeah, and you don't get all of that. And you might spend years dreaming about when I'm the boss and I get to have my, parking space and the corner office and the door that I can close. And actually, that just isn't really what leadership's about.
Yeah. And how do you find people take that? Because in my experience, when you start affecting someone's status, even for like the noblest of reasons, that has, as you said, a huge visceral effect inside of them.
Yes.
So is there a particular way you pitch that and how you talk? Is there a particular way you communicate that to people?
Well, the tricky part is the visceral effect has to be hidden because nobody is going to really sit in front of their colleagues and say, but I like my title and status. So by obligation, we have to kind of sort of play the line. Yeah. But internally, there's of course a lot of angst that comes with that. So what you find is it then plays out in sort of the undertones of certain conversations where people tend to dig their heels in and become stubborn over an issue. And it's not really about the issue. It's about the fact we're dismantling that architecture that they've kind of built up around themselves. So that's the second part of the way we approach things. That's the conscious leadership. And honestly, great leaders are people who are humble enough to know where their strengths are and decent people enough to recognize what the impact is that they're having on other people. So with enough humility and enough people getting over their own egos, we can achieve that.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating in terms of that sort of self-awareness aspect. because you and I have both worked in the coaching space for a long time, and coaching has always required a certain amount of self-awareness in the coach as well as the coachee. But far too many people, I'm afraid to say, in my experience in the Agile world, like to tell rather than listen. You've got 2 ears, 1 mouth, but they don't seem to get that. But now we're sort of almost taking that coaching aspect into those leadership positions.
Yes.
Because the standard joke, what I'm trying to build to without saying it, is there's a standard joke that senior bosses are sociopaths. You hear it from people, they say their boss is like this villainous villain, who's risen to this position. And that there may be elements of truth, there may not be elements of truth. But how do you think that plays out, that sort of self-awareness aspect compared to that sort of caricature of the cigar-smoking evil boss?
Well, we're definitely seeing fewer of those. Organisations are not doing a bad job of selecting and promoting based on values. But of course, a number of those people hold power and influence, and therefore it's almost impossible to unseat someone when they happen to hold the power and they have that kind of impact. I think that's sort of called like toxic leadership. It's kind of an interesting topic attached to that. But we run management training courses. That's the majority of what we do. We tend to pitch to middle and senior management, so this is our audience. And I think it's fair to say that coaching skills and leadership skills are essentially blending into a single topic, because good leadership essentially is now a coaching approach. It's asking, not telling. The big barrier to that being effective is if you were to do a professional coaching certification of reasonable quality, and you think about the amount of time, so it could be anything up to a couple of years, and at the end of it you probably have to meet some sort of criteria, you then get a certificate, you probably have to receive supervision, and there's quite a lot that comes with it. And then when we're doing a leadership training course, you might spend a couple of days on coaching, if you're lucky. Two days of a module might be a coaching module. And the risk here is people walk out of that and go, right, that's me done on the coaching scenario. And I would argue that if coaching and leadership are becoming similar or synonymous, and to do coaching well in a formal qualification is years worth of study with follow-up and accreditation, we probably need to be quite cautious about people feeling that they are great coaches having just done the course.
It's like in the Agile coaching space, I'm finding, where we are giving people tools to coach, but we don't get enough time with them. And so all we are is, unfortunately, equipping villains with slightly better weaponry. So now, rather than bully someone, they can use Socratic questioning to sort of hint someone into a corner, or to hint someone to a behaviour they want. And so that sort of almost Hippocratic oath, isn't it? First, do no harm. Is something I think modern leadership really has to embrace. It's not a wishy-washy, you must hearts and minds protect the environment. It's a real practical day-to-day thing, integrity. Now, the reason why I asked Chris to come to this session, I've known Chris for years, but I've been recently looking more into the Agile leadership world. I don't know if you know, but the Scrum Alliance has been reformulating its certified Agile leadership courses and certifications. And so I've been looking into developing my work in that space. I've done quite a bit of leadership work in the past, but it's all been very sort of ad hoc. Trying to formulate it into some sort of model has been quite fascinating for me. But what I'm finding is constantly is not the clash between Agile and leadership, but understanding how they dovetail, where do they not dovetail, and where, because what my concern is what we shouldn't be doing is telling grandmother how to suck eggs. What we shouldn't really be doing is having technical people telling leaders how to lead. I think that would be ill-advised. But correspondingly, there's a lot to learn out there from leaders in modern organisations, and we need to help bring that to them. And so, what's been your experience of Agile, Chris, so far?
Well, I've worked with quite a few Agile teams, and more, when you get a boardroom together, there will normally be someone who is responsible for a team that's working in an Agile way, or will be adopting some sort of Scrum approach. The interesting thing here is Agile as a methodology supports our definition quite nicely of leadership being about influence, not power. So what you'll find is organisations that are invested in that type of methodology will generally look towards a more of a project-based team, in which case one of the first questions I have when people come on courses is they'll say, well, I don't have any direct reports. because they're managing a project team.
Yeah.
So actually, they will generally have authority over the project, but not line management authority over the people in it. They'll have lines off to other directors and other managers. And a lot of people come onto the inverted commas leadership training feeling a little uncomfortable that they themselves aren't really leaders because I don't have direct reports. And actually, I probably would argue or posit now, this is the very place where you're going to be evaluating how effective you are as a leader. I mean, ultimately, as a manager, if I'm on the back foot, I'm pretty annoyed with my team and I want them to do something. The reality is, I can use force. I can threaten them. I'm doing their appraisals, promotions, bonuses, whatever it is. So ultimately, I can leverage authority to make people do stuff. When you take that away, you're kind of forced into, do I have good leadership or not? Can I influence people effectively to do it? And then we're sort of hinting back to your dark side now. Is there a light and dark side of being able to influence people? And I think then you're into motivate, manipulate, as the distinction between the two words. And what's my intention?
It's like Robert Greenleaf in Servant Leadership talks about, like lead through coercion, or lead through sort of manipulation, or lead through persuasion. We're really trying to teach people how to persuade, how to help someone else understand what it is we're trying to do. So I find that really, really interesting, really resonant with what we're trying to do. It's like the difference between leader and leadership, isn't it?
Yes.
Like leadership's an attribute or a skill. Leader's a role. And I think being able to take that situational leadership up is going to be more and more important, higher and lower in an organisation. It's not going to just be limited to a few select priests at the top. It's something that's now being spread across the wider space.
Yeah, and I could even say, I think if I look back at some of my previous presentations, even like 15 years ago, I was quoting people talking about leadership at all levels was one of the great desires of organisations. I want people to feel like you're a leader wherever you are, however senior you are, and that's a very noble intention. The thing is, if you want someone to feel like a leader, they have to feel they have some agency over their world. They have to feel they are entrusted with some things in order for that desire to step up to it. So you've kind of got the intention on the one hand, I want everyone to be leaders, and it comes into conflict with the, but we can't give too much freedom to people because otherwise they might screw it up.
They make the wrong decision.
Exactly. Right. And I think that's probably where the tension has existed for years and years, and maybe what we're experiencing now in the sort of changing world environment we're in is really that stress testing. How much control can we have over our workforce?
And just think about that, just taking it back in terms of when you said about coaching, I do long-term coaching programs. You almost want to be able to travel back in time to leaders and say, it'd be really good if 10 years ago you spent 2 years on this. But what can you do? You've got to play the cards you're dealt. You're in the position you're in. Now, something else I wanted to talk about is something else that has drifted into the Agile space. It's been around since early 2000s, maybe late 90s. The concept of VUCA. Do you talk about that a lot in your work? How do you approach that?
Yeah, VUCA is almost a guaranteed topic on the leadership training course right now.
Could you expand on what it is for the audience?
Yeah, so volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Originally, this was a military term that was used to describe modern warfare, essentially being almost impossible to strategize because it's constantly moving and constantly changing and almost so complex it's unknowable. So at the moment we're doing a huge 2-3 year project with a premium automotive company, exactly helping their leaders address the VUCA environment. The big challenge that VUCA presents is, if you think about, and I think we're in danger of blending or merging together leader and manager words, for the sake of argument, let's assume they're somewhat interchangeable for this particular discussion, which is, if you think about someone in a leadership role or a management role, almost the currency is to have some knowledge and some certainty on which they can inform their decisions. So I'm going to make intelligent, informed decisions based on evidence in front of me. And what VUCA does is it sort of takes that off the table. Essentially, it kind of says you can't possibly know it because the data is so large and so complex, and the ambiguity and complexity of the situation, the nature of the volatility means all you can do is make a guess. And you can make your best guess. And by the way, there isn't a right guess because there's other guesses that would have just been different. I think that's a very uneasy thing for a leader to feel, that there wasn't a right answer.
Yeah.
Because if they make a decision, even if it turned out not to be the right one, that doesn't mean it was the wrong one.
Yeah.
It was just there might have been a different one.
Yeah.
And that's so the nature of VUCA, I think, has again, it's pulled the rug out of what a leadership is for a lot of leaders.
Yeah.
And it's left them kind of going, well, if I don't know the answer and I can't predict the answer and I can't get all the knowledge in order to get the answer, so what am I then?
Yeah.
Well, Cynefin is huge in the Agile space.
Yep.
Dave Snowden's work on complexity science.
Yep.
And he talks a lot about having to run experiments, complex, sense, probe, respond.
Yes.
There being no right or wrong answer, but being good and bad answers or good and bad questions
Yes.
that you have to ask. And that is a real mindset shift, the idea of we're going to have to gamble a little bit here. We're going to have to have safe to fail experiments that we learn from, rather than all go this way or all go that way. Especially if you think in automotive, I don't want to get too close to that subject, but as someone not involved in that, it's easy to say that they've got to make some big choices in terms of electric transport, automated transport, that fundamentally changes what automobiles are. Yeah, and I think that's quite fascinating in terms of what we do. But also, I'm seeing some leadership at the moment in the world. Now, I don't want to date this quite straight away, but in terms of COVID vaccines, people are running experiments, creating vaccinations, but they're also producing large amounts of vaccine. Now, these vaccines may never get used because the vaccine may not work. But rather than take the risk of doing an experiment, finding out it works, and then producing it, they're running the two things in parallel to reduce the time to market to help save people's lives. It's basically spending money to reduce cycle time. And that's a hard choice to make for leaders. A lot of leaders I've come across have been very motivated by traditional things like budgets, profit, loss, managing the costs efficiently and effectively. Yet something like that example is they're having to spend to save. And I think that's a whole different conversation for leaders to approach.
And this is where our worlds are starting to converge around some topics. So when we're teaching leadership now, predominantly our leadership training is about teaching people to run controlled experimentation. Give it a go, see what happens, get data. And what we see when we try and run these kind of simulations on a training course is the desire to try and gather all of the data first before we take any steps. And I think that's probably what you've been doing for years and years. Now this is becoming a leadership behaviour. In the same way as I think you said there's good or bad questions, which is exactly our conversation about what is coaching. So a good coach is simply someone who asks really good questions, or at least predominantly that's a big chunk of what a good coaching role is. So good and bad questions, and if coaching is somewhat similar or synonymous with good leadership, you then have a link into what good leadership is as well. So these subjects are all kind of coming together in some way.
Yeah, because I'm feeling that Agile's always been an umbrella term. Okay, so an umbrella, it was a term that was put on things that pre-existed. So there's lots of ideas and concepts in the world of technology, software, product development that was sort of bundled into this Agile sort of terminology and mindset. And so it's not exactly something new anyway, it's something historical. And I think there is elements in there that are very powerful for leaders to understand. Things like, we talk about empowerment, experimentation, evidence, data. But they're also, it seems to be quite a useful umbrella, like a Trojan horse almost, to introduce other leadership concepts. Like the idea of coaching, of facilitation, of influence, what's interesting to me in terms of Agile leadership and Agile and how they work together is understanding, I think, I'm not quite sure where I'm going with this, but understanding that we don't want people to be, what we don't want is people to assume that Agile has all the answers for people. Right? It doesn't. It asks interesting questions, right? It can be a useful concept, a useful mindset to introduce those thoughts to leaders as well as people on the ground. But we've got to make sure that when we're communicating this stuff, we're communicating it with integrity, right? Not telling them things that aren't true. We communicate it in their language as well. Because my concern is, in terms of Agile leadership, which is different to leadership and Agile, is what I don't want us is people who aren't in those roles telling people in those roles what to do. I want people in the Agile space to be able to communicate how they work and what they do to help leaders build better, more Agile organisations.
Right. So I have a question back to you then. So we have sort of the most senior stakeholder in one particular project, a plant director, saw the training that we were delivering, saw that agility is part of it, leadership agility, it's one of the modules that we're talking about, had an immediate reaction. That's a buzzword right now. Everyone's branding everything as agile. And of course, we then tried to look for a better word because we're not teaching people agile perhaps as you teach it, but what we do believe is that leaders should be open-minded, flexible, and all of this stuff we're talking about. So where do you see the difference between, if we've got leader and leadership, is there something like agility and agile as two separate concepts?
So people are trying to do that. That is happening across the agile space. It always historically was big A agile, little a agile.
Yes,
that's how they would say it. You know, sort of like the agile, the thing, and agile being flexible. Some people are trying to use the word agility instead to get away from that sort of boxing mentality. When the term agile was chosen, the 17 writers of the manifesto, they had another term on the plate they didn't pick, which is adaptable. Which I use a lot in work because I want to get away from the buzzwords. I want to get people back to the actual behaviours, the cause, and not get caught up in jargon. So you find, as I do, that some people find jargon and terminology, buzzwords quite resonant. They find them quite attractive, and some people hate anything like that. You know, they don't want to be a member of any club. You know, they want to go their own way and find the right language for them. I think is really important.
Well, and then we also then have, I suppose, the mirror problem, which is we get some people then on the leadership training who are experts in agile, who then come onto the module on leadership agility and start then saying, no, that's not how you do it, because they're putting their technical knowledge of agile onto what essentially is the soft skill framework of people leadership, and that makes it kind of awkward because we don't want to say no, you're wrong, but likewise there's a different lens that we're putting on this topic, which they're missing sometimes.
And I think that's why it's like, for me, in terms of agile as a mindset, basically, it's quite, when people talk about agile, it's quite high level, quite philosophical. It's Agile Manifesto, you know, it's a one pager and 12 principles, but that's it. Really, right? But a lot of people talk about agile, they normally mean Scrum. So when they say agile, the two terms are interchangeable in their heads. So Scrum's the method. So you go, and the Scrum method says X, right? And so in Agile, there's actually a lot of wiggle, you know, because the terms are things like the best way to communicate is face to face. It doesn't say the only way to communicate, that's the best way to communicate is face to face. And so it's sort of, you know, you've got some wiggle in there, but sort of the methods are quite disciplined. So what we've discovered is to get flexibility, you need discipline. You don't get flexibility through hilariously being overly flexible. You're just chaotic. It's like a round the world yacht. You know, around the world yacht's incredibly flexible, incredibly robust, incredibly dynamic, but it only gets there through good engineering and a highly disciplined, skilled crew. Right? That's how you get flexibility. If everyone just turned up on a raft, said drinking and going, "Wee," then they'd end up sinking in Portsmouth Harbour. And so the idea of sort of trying to get them to understand that, you know, great discipline leads to flexibility is a key thing that people don't get.
And now you're bridging once again between our two worlds, because ambidextrous leadership is one of the key things we're being asked to talk more and more about. Ambidexterity being the contradiction of, if I want to lead well in today's world, I need to be both stable and dynamic in my leadership style. And the question is, can that be embodied in one person? Which honestly, I'm not entirely sure. I think most people do have a preference towards one or the other. But I do think in a management team, it's important that there's both stability and dynamism, and in our processes we have some processes which are designed for stability and some processes which are designed for dynamism, but it's that sense of how can you ask people to do both effectively?
I remember D. Hock wrote, when he used to be president of Visa, he called it Chaodian leadership. So he would say there's some areas you need chaos, high variability, and some areas you need high disciplined order. The story I always heard, and again, apologies, this isn't true, you know, when you hear the myth and you hear the truth, you always print the myth. But the story was D. Hock was a minor vice president in an American bank, and in the 60s the American banks were clashing horribly over credit cards, over fraud. You know, they didn't even work together. Do you remember those old credit card machines? They couldn't exist because credit cards were different sizes. And so there's a huge amount of variance, and they're causing chaos in the banking system. So the banks will come together, allegedly in a smoke-filled room, to discuss this. And some banks want high alignment. We've got to have one system that we work under, one card to rule them all. But the smaller banks are terrified of this, because they're saying, well, the only way we can differentiate from mega bank is by offering like different card rates to farmers in Idaho or something. And so if we have just one card rate, you'll just crush us. Why would they go small when they can go with you? And the big banks are saying, but if we have too much variance, we've got no interwork. We're going to get fraud and troubles. And allegedly, D. Hock was the person who said, I think you're both right. We do need areas of high integration and agreement and discipline, and we need areas of high flexibility and variance. And the story goes, the bankers all went, oh, that's great, good luck, D. And sort of sent him off on the mission, and he's founded Visa. There's that concept of sort of K-Ordian, where discipline and flexibility in organisations, I think a lot of organisations don't get that. So in terms of Agile, we get people who are being overly flexible with the wrong things and being overly severe with the wrong things. And getting the wrong way around. But also in terms of leaders, because you get to a certain point, you have to, like, let's say I'm a team lead doing cleaning of the offices. Right? So I'm the head of facilities in the office. I can be quite ordered, quite rigorous. We've got to do the same things the same way. Especially in COVID crisis, I've got to make sure everything's cleaned in the right way, followed the right process. I'm a software developer team lead. I'm a scrum master. We're going to have, great flexibility around the sort of uncertainty of scope as we build this new app to help our colleagues work together across the company. But as you start getting higher the company, as you said, those two sides have to live in one person.
Right.
I don't have a simple answer for that. I know I prefer one style over the other, but I don't have a simple answer. I know we don't have the right answer here, but how do you think people could handle that?
Well,
what ideas do you have on that?
Some years ago, I was introduced to a German management guru called Friedman Malik, and even at that time, I think it was following the financial crisis, he said leaders need to live in a world of ambiguity. Again, this was almost pre-VUCA. And he said leaders need to hold two opposing ideas in their mind and nevertheless act. And I think that's the idea of in the Visa story. How can both be possible when they are seemingly the antithesis of each other? It's an either or. How can an either or become an and? And there is some view in the ambidextrous leadership space that the way is to almost interpret the stability part as being another buzzword, by the way, if we're going to add buzzwords into our list here, agility being one, resilience.
Is another one.
So there is some view that resilient teams, resilient organisations, even personal resilience, all of which you'll get pretty good ratings for if you stick those words in, is actually sort of more about stability. Resilience is about being able to kind of weather the storm. And I was looking at a professor talking about this who described that as a defense tactic. So your defense tactic, which is about stability, is building resilience, and then your offensive tactics is about building in the dynamism that's needed, and that is where the other buzzword of agility is likely to play its part. So I think the way that a senior manager can view it is you need to build enough resilience in your organisation so that it's stable, but stable enough to create agile working spaces, flexible working, because we've got those basic bits right. Now, the art is probably to know which bits you lock down and which bits you leave unlocked. And honestly, I don't know that there would be a rule book for that.
No, I know in terms of the Agile stuff, that's been some of the stuff I've been trying to make clear and spell out. Where I feel there needs to be stability and flexibility. But even in the Agile space, which is relatively small, that's a highly complex conversation. The minute you start adding in all the other dimensions of reality, it's going to become very difficult. I think the best you could do is advice. But you're talking about the term I've heard is anti-fragility. Hussein Taleb's.
I've seen it.
So it's not like robust like a brick. The brick is inflexible, but it's not like Play-Doh. It's finding something in between the two, something that has the ability to adapt to change, or be stronger.
Be stronger through it.
Through the change, which again is an easy thing to say in a book, and hard to do when it's your real life job and career.
I nodded all the way through reading it, and I'm still left going, but I'm not entirely sure how one. Masters that. My automotive client, they're building cars. It takes about 60 seconds to build a car. Everything is documented in the most effective process that you could imagine. And yet they know, as you say, it's an industry facing enormous and rapid change. It has some of the challenger companies who are doing like the wildcard options. So how do you build a car every 60 seconds with the right level of quality and standardization and still say to the workforce, hey, and let's get creative.
Yeah.
How can you be creative? And again, don't want to step too much away from leadership, but the big issue in the Agile space is we've been in software, for instance, where a lot of it comes from. Very creative, very dynamic, not necessarily had the rigor behind it that other engineering professions have had. And the issue I'm having is that is infecting other companies.
I see.
So we're seeing like self-driving cars misidentifying objects and stuff. And this is all part of the element of software engineering not being approached with the level and ethos of discipline, quality, rigor, resilience that it should be. Now that's not actually an Agile issue. That's actually because Agile is all about engineering quality. But somehow I think some people, when they hear agility, they think flexible. When they think flexible, they think flexing quality.
Yeah.
And again, how do we, as a leader, I may not see the consequences of flexing quality, but that's a key part of my job.
Yeah.
Imagine if a car manufacturer puts out 100,000 cars that misdrive in the automated world. That manufacturer's doomed. Their brand is doomed. They're never coming back from it.
And then bringing it back to the leadership topic, I could stand very proudly as a leader to look at the stability of our processes, the robustness of our organisation, and then meet an equal peer group leader from a different organisation who stands by the creative agility of their organisation, and both would proudly say, you know, this is our contribution. I don't know that I've met the person or the organisation that would proudly say we achieve both. And if we do, it might be more in your world than mine, I think.
It's a fascinating space. And we could keep talking forever and ever and ever, but I'm afraid our film studio is going to come up for expiry on our booking soon. So I'd just like to say, can I touch elbows with you, Chris, in the COVID crisis? There we go. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. Would you like to explain where people can find out more about your various videos, online webinars, and products and services?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the easiest thing would be to find me on LinkedIn, because that's pretty much where I post things. But if you go to the website www.strategicleaders.com, there's an events section in there where we list, and we're doing quite a lot of free webinars right now just to try and keep messages going out when we can't be face to face with people. You still want to keep that conversation alive, so there's quite a lot happening at the moment.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I'll see you all next episode on the Age of Uncertainty podcast, where it'll actually be the one I promised this time, which is centralised versus decentralised agile coaching. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you have also, and I'll see you again next time. Cheerio.
Next episode, centralised versus decentralised agile coaching.